The alarm screamed through the cramped cockpit of the stealth fighter as Marcus Chen pulled back on the controls, his knuckles white against the black metal. Below him, the sprawling megacity of Neo-Tokyo stretched out like a circuit board made of light, its neon veins pulsing with the rhythm of 8 billion beating hearts. But Marcus wasn't looking at the city. His eyes were locked on the readings flooding his heads-up display, each one more impossible than the last. "Control, this is Ghost 7, he said into his comm, voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. "I'm reading massive energy signatures coming from the target zone. This doesn't match any of our intel." Static crackled back at him. Then came the voice of Commander Hayes, cold as always. "Ghost 7, your orders remain unchanged. Proceed to coordinates and eliminate the target. No deviations." Marcus gritted his teeth. 3 months of preparation had led to this moment. Operation Darkwing was supposed to be simple. Infiltrate the abandoned industrial district, neutralize whatever weapon the enemy had been developing, and get out clean. But the readings on his scanner told a different story entirely. The energy patterns weren't mechanical. They were organic, alive. He banked hard to the left, slicing between 2 towering corporate spires that rose like metallic fangs into the polluted sky. His fighter's adaptive camouflage rippled, bending light around the hull until he became nothing more than a whisper in the darkness. Below, the city's lower levels sprawled in perpetual shadow, choked with steam from countless factories and the glow of illegal modification shops where people traded flesh for chrome. "Ghost 7, you're drifting off course," Hayes' voice cut through his thoughts. "Correct your heading immediately." But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. His scanner had picked up something else. A distress signal, faint but unmistakable. It was coming from the same coordinates as his target. The frequency was like nothing in any human database, alien yet somehow familiar, like a half-remembered dream. He dropped altitude, skimming just above the maze of pipes and ventilation systems that crowned the industrial sector. The air here was thick with chemical fog, tinted green and orange by the processing plants that worked around the clock. Most of the factories had been automated decades ago, their human workers replaced by tireless machines and artificial minds. But tonight, something else moved in the shadows between the smokestacks. The distress signal grew stronger as he approached the target coordinates. Marcus switched to thermal imaging and felt his breath catch in his throat. There, in the center of what should have been an empty warehouse, was a heat signature unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was massive, easily the size of a transport vehicle, but the thermal patterns were all wrong. Too organic, too alive. "Control, I need clarification on the target," Marcus said, his finger hovering over the weapons release. "What exactly am I supposed to be destroying here?" The silence stretched for long seconds. When Hayes finally responded, there was something different in his voice, something almost like fear. "Ghost 7, you have your orders. Fire on target and return to base immediately." Marcus circled the warehouse once more, his scanners probing deeper. The building itself was ancient by the district's standards, maybe 50 years old, its concrete walls stained with decades of acid rain and industrial runoff. But inside, something moved with purpose. The heat signature shifted, and for just a moment, Marcus could have sworn he saw the outline of wings. That's when he heard it. Not through his comm system or his fighter's sensors, but somehow directly in his mind. A sound that was part cry, part song, filled with a loneliness so profound it made his chest ache. It was the sound of something young and afraid, calling out for help that would never come. Marcus closed his eyes and made a choice that would change everything. Instead of firing, he brought his fighter down in a controlled landing on the warehouse roof. The building groaned under the weight, but held. He popped the cockpit canopy and climbed out, the toxic air immediately burning his lungs despite his flight suit's filters. The smell hit him like a physical force, ozone and sulfur and something else, something wild and ancient. Ghost 7, what is your status? Hayes's voice crackled from the fighter's external speakers. Report immediately. Marcus ignored the call. He found a skylight that had been shattered years ago and rappelled down into the warehouse on a cable from his emergency kit. The moment his boots touched the concrete floor, he knew he was in the presence of something extraordinary. She was beautiful and terrible at the same time. A dragon, no bigger than a large dog, but unmistakably real. Her scales were deep blue-black, shot through with veins of silver that pulsed with their own inner light. Her wings, still too small to carry her weight, trembled as she huddled against a pile of discarded machinery. And her eyes, ancient golden eyes that held intelligence and pain in equal measure, fixed on Marcus the moment he appeared. Around her neck was a collar of alien metal, its surface crawling with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Energy conduits snaked from the collar to a massive machine that hummed with malevolent purpose. Marcus didn't need to be a scientist to understand what he was seeing. This wasn't a weapon, it was a prison. And the dragon wasn't the threat. She was the victim. The young dragon tried to back away as Marcus approached, but the collar's tether held her fast. She made that sound again, that heartbreaking cry for help, and Marcus felt something break inside his chest. This was wrong. Everything about this mission was wrong. He knelt down slowly, hands visible and empty. "Hey there, little one," he whispered. "I'm not going to hurt you." The dragon's head tilted, studying him with those impossible eyes. Up close, Marcus could see the exhaustion in her posture, the way her breathing came quick and shallow. How long had she been trapped here? How long had she been alone? "Ghost 7, you are ordered to complete your mission immediately." Hayes's voice boomed from the fighter above. "This is your final warning." Marcus looked up at the skylight, then back at the dragon. She was watching him intently now, as if she understood that her fate hung in the balance. In the distance, he could hear the whine of approaching engines. More fighters, coming to finish what he couldn't. The choice was simple, really. Follow orders and become a monster, or break every rule he'd ever sworn to uphold and try to save something innocent and beautiful in a world that had forgotten what those words meant. Marcus reached for the tools on his belt and started working on the collar's locking mechanism. "Looks like we're both about to become fugitives, sweetheart. Hope you're ready for the ride of your life." The dragon's eyes widened as the collar clicked open and fell to the floor. For the first time since he'd entered the warehouse, she made a different sound, something that might have been joy. The moment the collar hit the concrete floor with a metallic clang, everything changed. The dragon's silver-veined scales flared with brilliant light, and Marcus felt a surge of energy wash over him like warm sunlight after a lifetime of shadow. But there was no time to marvel at the sensation. The whine of approaching fighters was growing louder by the second. "Can you move?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure if the creature could understand him. The dragon's response came not in words, but as a flood of images and emotions that crashed into his mind like a tidal wave. He saw flashes of her capture, scientists in sterile white coats, needles and probes and endless pain. But underneath it all was something else, gratitude so pure it brought tears to his eyes. The warehouse doors exploded inward just as Marcus scooped the dragon into his arms. She was lighter than she looked, her body warm against his chest as pulse rifle fire lit up the darkness around them. Through the gaping doorway came 6 figures in matte black combat armor, their faces hidden behind tactical visors that glowed with targeting data. "Target acquired," one of them announced in a voice distorted by electronic modulators. "Pilot Chen, step away from the specimen immediately." Marcus backed toward his rappelling line, the dragon clutched protectively in his arms. Specimen? She's not some lab experiment. She's alive. The lead soldier raised his weapon. That thing is classified as a Class 5 xeno-threat. Our orders are to terminate it, and anyone who interferes with the mission. A Class 5 xeno-threat. Marcus felt his blood run cold. Those were the classifications reserved for entities that could potentially threaten entire star systems. But looking down at the young dragon in his arms, all he saw was a frightened child who had been tortured by people who should have protected her. "You've got 30 seconds to comply, Chen," the soldier continued. "Drop the creature and surrender." Marcus glanced up at his fighter, still perched on the warehouse roof. Too far to reach before they cut him down. But the dragon shifted in his arms and made a soft chittering sound, and suddenly Marcus felt something change in the air around them. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds, and frost began forming on the metal surfaces nearby. "What the hell?" one of the soldiers started to say, but his words were cut short as the dragon opened her mouth and released a stream of crystalline breath that turned the air itself solid. The soldiers' weapons froze solid in their hands, the metal so cold it burned through their gloves. Marcus didn't waste the opportunity. He clipped the rappelling line to his harness and activated the winch, pulling himself and the dragon up toward the skylight as chaos erupted below. The soldiers were scrambling for backup weapons, shouting orders that made no sense in the face of something that shouldn't exist. They burst through the skylight just as Marcus's fighter came under attack from the other stealth aircraft. Missile trails crisscrossed the night sky, and the warehouse roof shook under the impact of near misses. Marcus dove into his cockpit, settling the dragon in the narrow space behind his seat before slamming the canopy shut. "Hold on, little one," he muttered, firing up the engines. "This is about to get interesting." The fighter lifted off just as the warehouse roof collapsed under rocket fire. Marcus pushed the throttle forward and felt the familiar pressure of acceleration pin him to his seat. Behind him, the dragon made a sound that might have been excitement or terror, probably both. "Ghost 7, you are in violation of direct orders." Hayes's voice crackled over the comm. "Return to base immediately, or we will be forced to shoot you down." Marcus switched off his transponder and banked hard to starboard, diving into the forest of skyscrapers that made up Neo-Tokyo's financial district. His fighter's stealth systems were still active, but that wouldn't help him for long. They knew his capabilities, his preferred tactics, even the way he thought. He needed to do something unexpected. The dragon shifted behind him, and Marcus felt another wave of images flood his mind. This time, he saw things from her perspective, the city below not as a maze of glass and steel, but as a living organism with currents of energy flowing between the buildings. She could see the electromagnetic fields that powered the city's infrastructure, the data streams that carried information at the speed of light, even the bioelectric signatures of the 8 billion people who called this place home. And she could see something else. High above the city, hidden behind layers of stealth technology and bureaucratic secrecy, floated a massive installation that didn't appear on any public map. It was there that her kind had been brought, studied, experimented upon. It was there that the real decisions were made. "You want to go home?" Marcus whispered, understanding flooding through him. "But home isn't a place, is it? It's your people." The dragon pressed closer to him, and he felt her fear and longing as if they were his own emotions. She was the last of her clutch, possibly the last of her species on Earth. The others had been taken to that hidden station, subjected to procedures that had left them changed, broken, or worse. Marcus made another decision that would have been impossible just an hour earlier. Instead of trying to escape the city, he turned his fighter toward the coordinates the dragon had shown him. If her family was up there, then that's where they needed to go. The ascent through Earth's atmosphere was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. As they climbed higher, the dragon's presence in his mind became stronger, clearer. He began to understand that what he had mistaken for a simple distress call was actually something far more complex. She wasn't just calling for help. She was calling for justice. The space station materialized out of the darkness like a metallic cancer growing on the face of the void. It was massive, easily the size of a small city, its hull bristling with weapons and sensor arrays. But what caught Marcus's attention were the organic structures growing along its outer surface, twisted, crystalline formations that pulsed with the same silver light he had seen in the dragon's scales. "Dear God," he breathed. "What have they done?" The dragon's reply came as another flood of images, but these were different, darker. He saw laboratories where her kind had been dissected, their genetic material harvested and combined with human DNA. He saw hybrid creatures, part dragon and part machine, writhing in containment chambers. And he saw the truth that Command had hidden from everyone, including him. The dragons weren't invaders or threats. They were refugees, fleeing from something so terrible that even their ancient memories recoiled from it. And humanity's response had been to capture them, study them, and try to turn their abilities into weapons of war. The space station's automated defenses locked onto his fighter as he approached, but Marcus had expected that. What he hadn't expected was for the station's weapons to suddenly power down as the dragon behind him sang out in a frequency that human ears couldn't hear. One by one, the defense turrets went silent, their targeting systems somehow confused or disabled. Marcus brought his fighter into the station's hangar bay, landing between rows of experimental aircraft that looked like nothing in any military catalog. As the artificial gravity took hold and the atmospheric processors hummed to life, he popped the canopy and helped the dragon out of the cramped cockpit. She stood on the hangar deck for a moment, her small form dwarfed by the massive space around them. Then she threw back her head and sang again, the sound echoing off the metal walls like a hymn of homecoming. And from the depths of the station, other voices began to answer. They came from everywhere at once, dozens of dragons in various stages of maturity, their scales bearing the scars of surgical procedures and experimental modifications. Some walked on legs that had been replaced with mechanical prosthetics. Others had wings that flickered with electronic implants. But their eyes were alive with intelligence and hope as they recognized one of their own. The young dragon ran to them, and Marcus watched as she was enfolded in a reunion that spoke to something deeper than species or biology. This was family finding family, survivors recognizing survivors. And as he stood there in the hangar bay of a secret military installation, surrounded by creatures that officially didn't exist, Marcus realized that his old life was over. A new sound echoed through the station, human voices shouting orders, the clatter of boots on metal, the whine of energy weapons powering up. The station's security forces had finally responded to the breach, and they were coming in force. But the dragons were ready for them. As the first soldiers burst into the hangar bay, they found themselves facing not helpless test subjects, but a united family willing to fight for their freedom. The air filled with frost and flame, with the song of ancient voices raised in defiance, with the sound of chains breaking after far too long. And in the center of it all stood Marcus Chen, no longer a pilot following orders, but a man who had chosen to stand with the innocent against the machinery of oppression. He raised his sidearm as the first wave of soldiers approached, but he wasn't alone. The young dragon he had rescued stood beside him, her scales blazing with silver fire, ready to protect the human who had given her hope. The battle for the station had begun, and with it, the first chapter of a revolution that would change two species forever. The battle raged through the corridors of the space station like wildfire through dry timber. Marcus pressed his back against a bulkhead as pulse rifle fire lit up the hallway in front of him. The young dragon crouched low beside him. Her scales had darkened to almost black, a camouflage response he was learning to recognize as her combat mode. "They're trying to reach the central lab," she said, and Marcus nearly jumped out of his skin. The voice was clear as crystal in his mind, definitely female, with an accent that reminded him of wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "You can talk," he said aloud, then felt foolish for stating the obvious. "We've always been able to talk," she replied, a hint of amusement coloring her mental voice. "Your people just never bothered to listen. My name is Lyrelai, by the way. I thought you should know, since we're probably going to die together." Marcus checked his weapons charge indicator, half depleted already, and they still had 3 decks to go before they reached the main laboratory where the other dragons were being held. "We're not going to die," he said with more confidence than he felt. "And it's Marcus Chen. I know who you are," Lyrelai said. "The others have been singing about you since we landed. The first human to choose us over his own kind. They're calling you the Bridge Builder." Before Marcus could ask what that meant, another wave of soldiers rounded the corner. But this time, they weren't alone. One of the older dragons, a massive creature with bronze scales and eyes like molten copper, rose behind the human forces like a mountain coming to life. His roar shook the entire station, and the soldiers' formation scattered like leaves in a hurricane. "Uncle Corvain always did have a flair for the dramatic," Lyrelai said fondly, as they watched the bronze dragon wade through the security forces with careful precision, knocking them unconscious rather than killing them. "He was a warrior poet before they captured him. 300 years of fighting the void, touched before he came to your world looking for sanctuary." The void touched. Marcus filed that name away as they followed Corvain deeper into the station. Whatever the dragons were running from, it was apparently still out there in the dark between stars. But right now, his focus had to be on the immediate problem. They reached the central laboratory just as the station's self-destruct countdown began echoing through the corridors. Red warning lights bathed everything in the color of blood, and Marcus felt his stomach drop. They're willing to destroy their own research rather than let it fall into the wrong hands. "No," Lyrelai said, her mental voice sharp with understanding. "They're not trying to stop us from escaping. They're trying to stop us from learning the truth." The laboratory doors were reinforced plasteel, thick enough to withstand a direct missile hit. But Corvain simply placed one massive claw against the locking mechanism and breathed a stream of what looked like liquid starlight. The metal didn't melt. It simply ceased to exist, molecules breaking down into component atoms that drifted away like glittering dust. Inside, Marcus found a horror show that would haunt his dreams for years to come. Rows of containment tanks held dragons in various stages of surgical modification. Some had been fitted with cybernetic implants that pulsed with alien energy. Others had been dissected and rebuilt, their organic parts replaced with synthetic alternatives. And in the center of it all, suspended in a tank of preservative fluid, was something that had once been a dragon, but was now something else entirely. "The Synthesis Project," a familiar voice said from behind them. Marcus spun around to find Commander Hayes standing in the doorway, his dress uniform pristine despite the chaos consuming the station around them. "Humanity's insurance policy against the day when our new allies decide they don't need us anymore." Marcus raised his weapon, but Hayes made no move to draw his own sidearm. "You know, Chen, I always thought you had potential. Too bad you let sentimentality cloud your judgment." Sentimentality. Marcus felt anger burning in his chest like rocket fuel. "Look around you, Hayes. This isn't research. This is torture." Hayes shrugged. "Necessary evils, pilot. You think the dragons came to Earth out of the goodness of their hearts? They're running from something out there in the dark, something so terrible that even their advanced civilization couldn't stand against it. When that something follows them here, and it will, we need to be ready." Lyrelai stepped forward, her scales beginning to glow with that dangerous silver light. The void touched, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the physical world now. You know about them. We know enough, Hayes replied. We know they consume entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty space where civilizations once thrived. We know they're attracted to psychic energy, which your people radiate like a beacon. And we know that when they arrive, conventional weapons will be useless against them. Marcus felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place in his mind. So, you decided to create weapons using dragon DNA. Turn them into living ships, living weapons. Turn them into humanity's salvation, Hayes corrected. Or at least, that was the plan before you decided to play hero. The countdown reached 60 seconds, and the station shuddered as emergency systems began venting atmosphere. But Lyralee had moved to one of the control panels, her claws dancing across the interface with inhuman speed. I can stop it, she said, but we need to get the others out of here first. Corvain and the other free dragons were already working on that, their combined efforts breaking open containment tanks and gently lifting their wounded kin to safety. Some of the modified dragons were too far gone to save, their minds lost to the surgical alterations. But many others were simply weak from prolonged captivity, their spirits unbroken, despite everything they had endured. 30 seconds, the computer announced with mechanical indifference. Hayes finally drew his sidearm, but not to point it at Marcus or the dragons. Instead, he pressed the barrel against his own temple. You think you're saving them, Chen, but you're just dooming both our species. When the void touched come, and they will come. Remember that you could have prevented it. Wait, Marcus started to say, but Hayes had already pulled the trigger. The man who had given him his orders for the last 5 years collapsed to the deck, his final expression one of grim satisfaction. 15 seconds. Lyralee's claws moved in a final desperate pattern across the control panel. Got it, she said, just as the countdown reached 0. But instead of an explosion, the station's lights shifted from red to blue, and the self-destruct alarm fell silent. How did you... Marcus began. Dragon technology built this station, she explained. Humans reverse-engineered our designs, but never understood the underlying principles. I simply convinced the computer that the countdown was a mistake. Over the next several hours, as they worked to evacuate the surviving dragons and shut down the more horrific experiments, Marcus learned more about the two species than any human before him. The dragons were indeed refugees, survivors of a galactic war that had consumed dozens of civilizations. The void touched were real, and they were coming. But they weren't inevitable. Your people have something we lost long ago, Corvain explained as they stood together on the station's observation deck, watching Earth turn slowly below them. You have hope. Not the desperate kind that drives you to terrible choices, but the simple faith that tomorrow can be better than today. What are you saying? Marcus asked. We're saying that perhaps Commander Hayes was right about one thing, Lyralee said, settling beside him like a cat seeking warmth. Our species do need each other, but not as master and slave or captor and prisoner, as partners, as family. She gestured to the other dragons, who were tending to their wounded with a combination of advanced medical technology and what could only be described as magic. We have knowledge, experience, power. You have something equally valuable, the ability to adapt, to grow, to become more than you were. The bridge builder, Marcus said, remembering what she had called him earlier. The first of many, we hope, she confirmed. Will you help us, Marcus Chen? Will you be the voice that speaks for both our kinds when the darkness comes? Marcus looked out at Earth, at the planet that had been his whole world until a few hours ago. Down there, billions of people went about their lives unaware that their government had been conducting experiments on sentient beings, unaware that an ancient enemy was moving through the void between stars, unaware that their future now depended on the choices made by a pilot who had chosen compassion over orders. "Yes," he said finally, "but not as your spokesman or your representative. As your friend." Lyralee's scales brightened with genuine joy. "Then we have hope after all." 3 months later, Marcus stood on the balcony of what had once been the most heavily guarded secret in human space, now transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. The Dragon-Human Cooperative had been established on the former military station, renamed Haven in a dozen different languages. Below him, in the station's converted laboratories, human and dragon scientists worked side by side on projects that would have been impossible for either species alone. "Ambassador Chen," a voice said behind him, and Marcus turned to find Lyralee approaching. She had grown significantly in the weeks since their first meeting, her wings now large enough to carry her weight in the station's low gravity. More importantly, she wore the ceremonial robes of a dragon prince, marking her as one of the few survivors qualified to speak for her people in matters of state. "Just Marcus," he said, as he always did. "We've been through this." "Actually, we haven't," she replied, with what he had learned to recognize as her mischievous expression. "There's something I need to tell you, something about dragon customs and the laws of succession." Marcus felt a familiar flutter of unease. Over the past months, he had discovered that dragon society was far more complex than he had initially imagined. There were protocols and traditions dating back millions of years, many of which made little sense to human minds. "When you rescued me," Lyralee continued, "when you chose to break your own laws to save one of us, you performed what we call the bonding of souls. It's an ancient ritual, one that creates ties deeper than marriage, stronger than blood." "Lyralee, what are you trying to tell me?" She smiled, revealing teeth that sparkled like diamonds. "I'm trying to tell you that according to the laws of my people, you're not just the bridge builder anymore. You're my bonded consort, which makes you a prince of the dragon realm by marriage." Marcus stared at her for a long moment. "You're joking." "Dragons don't joke about matters of succession," she said solemnly. Then her expression broke into pure mischief, though we do enjoy the look on your face right now. Before Marcus could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the station, but these weren't the harsh klaxons of danger. They were the melodic chimes that meant ships were arriving through the quantum tunnel network. Important ships. Together, they hurried to the command center, where the main display showed a sight that would have been impossible just months earlier. A combined fleet of human and dragon vessels was dropping out of hyperspace, their crews working in perfect coordination to establish a defensive perimeter around Haven. "The first joint patrol," Lyralee observed with satisfaction. "Your Admiral Rodriguez kept her word." "She's practical above all else," Marcus replied. "When we showed her the readings from the outer systems, she understood what we were facing." The void touched were coming. Long-range sensors had detected the first probes at the edge of the solar system, tendrils of living darkness that consumed light itself. But humanity and dragonkind were no longer alone against the darkness. They had each other, and they had hope. "Contact from the flagship," the communications officer announced. "They're requesting permission to come aboard." Marcus nodded. "Grant it, and prepare the war room. If we're going to save 2 civilizations, we need to plan this carefully." As the station prepared to receive its distinguished guests, Lyralee moved closer to Marcus. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. "Really ready? Once we begin, there's no going back to the way things were." Marcus looked around the command center, at human and dragon crew members working together with an efficiency that would have seemed miraculous just months ago. He thought about the children being born on Earth who would grow up in a universe where magic and technology walked hand in hand. He thought about the darkness coming from the void and the light they were building to meet it. "I've been ready since the moment I heard you calling for help," he said. Outside the viewports, stars wheeled in their ancient dance, beautiful and terrible and infinite. Somewhere out there in the darkness, an ancient enemy was moving toward them with patient hunger. But here, on a converted military station orbiting Earth, two species that had every reason to mistrust each other were proving that the universe still had room for miracles. Marcus Chen, the pilot who had once followed orders without question, now stood as a bridge between worlds. And as the first joint fleet of humanity and dragonkind prepared to face the coming storm, he knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The age of isolation was over. The age of unity had begun.